Liz, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. It's great to see you again and
It
to be
is
joining
awesome to
you.
see you. It is awesome to see you. So, I'd love to start by just giving my audience a little bit of background, who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. And I have to remember because we've met virtually, our relationship has been fully virtual, that we're really far apart.
It's true. It's true.
I know. I'm all the way over here in Dallas, Texas. And yes, as you said in the intro, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we met through our coaching endeavors. So I'm on the path to create some courses now around millennial relationships that hopefully people can access from anywhere once I get that going. But yeah, the heartbeat of my work over here is relationship. I just somehow got on that path of feeling very passionate about helping others thrive in their relationships, and probably a combination of all my personal stuff and the journey I've been on in my family and growing over here. I just came to really want to be in the business of marriage and committed relationships. And I think that what I've learned along the way and have experienced in my own path is that it is not easy
Mm,
to, first of all, figure out what it actually takes to have a relationship that not only survives but thrives in this modern age, and then how to make it last. So I'm kind of on this mission to help this generation figure that out and have epic relationships.
I love that. And I remember when we met, and you shared with me what you did and kind of your area of focus and passion. I think there was just such an instant connection because, as you know, I am slightly obsessed with relationships as well. I think that you bring this really unique focus though in terms of millennial relationships. So I'd love to just jump right in and ask you, in the area of relationships, there's so many different areas we could really focus on. Parenting. I work specifically with, high performing women and how they show up in their relationships. And for you, you've sort of niched down and really focused on the area of millennial relationships. So I've got some questions that I want to ask you about that. But before we do that, if you could just briefly tell us why millennial relationships? Why did you get so interested in this particular generation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it was kind of organic actually. When I first got licensed, I worked in an IOP, an intensive outpatient for substance abuse, that was in the area. And it was myself and the clinical director. So I had a lot of the one on one client interactions. But it just so happened that this particular agency had a lot of younger clients come through. The 18 to mid 20 age, they were millennials, very close to my age, actually. And as a therapist, we, at least for me in my training, was very much taught the whole thing of like, don't really bring you into the process. It's focused on your client and, kind of be that blank slate type of thing, which was fine. But what I really started to experience was clients just coming in and honestly, just based on that default, like, oh, okay, you appear to be close to my age, like you get what the world is like today. They really would open up and they would tell me things that they said they were not telling the other people that worked there that were a little bit older. And so that always kind of stuck out to me and got me thinking more about like the unique context of our world and what is so different today, and why, certain clients seek out therapists that are actually closer to their age, which I always thought was funny because I took another path in my own counseling journey and I was like, I need to find like the oldest, wisest, most like educated therapist out there. And
Right.
interestingly, like, I had good experiences and then I had other experiences that were like, no, you really don't get the world today. I'm going to find somebody else.
Right.
Um, so just that default connection with those clients really set me on this path, to learn a lot more about the generation that I myself was a part of, but hadn't even really thought to bring a deeper like study and education and just knowledge around. And that's how it began. I started my private practice on the side, very, very small, did like no marketing while I worked at that IOP. And I started blogging about millennials and relationships. And somehow back then it was way easier to get your blogs posted on like Huffington and places like that. And so I got some publications that, and some connections to larger platforms. And I really just started going with this thing of what makes millennial life and millennial relationships so different than other generations. And it turns out there's a lot.
Well, and that is exactly what we're here to talk about. And I'm really interested and excited to kind of pick your brain about this particular area because I can honestly say it's not an area that I am uniquely familiar with. I'm sure some of the themes, are going to resonate even for our audience as well. But could you share with us, what are some of the unique characteristics of millennials? And in the context of millennials within their relationships.
Absolutely. Yes, because I think to know this generation and what we specifically are faced with in our partnerships and those kinds of relationships, you have to understand the fuller picture. So I think a great place to start with all that is just the piece of technology, right? So millennials really were kind of the first generation um, to be born and grow up and technology not be as in your face and like completely accessible as it is now today. Like the generations that are born after millennials, they're born into that world. It's already here and it's moving at the speed of light. But millennials often reflect like, I didn't have a cell phone until X age. I didn't really use computers. My family didn't own this or that or whatever. So technology, the pace at which life is now moving for us and the instant access that we now have to so many things, including partner seeking and relationships and things that in past generations took a much different process to cultivate and get to. It's all in the palm of your hand. And there's still very minimal regulations around any of that stuff. So, our children, it's like it's on the parents to dictate that screen usage and all those types of things. So, technology is one of those huge contexts of the millennial generation that you have to look at to know who we are and what we deal with, right? I think with that instant access and through technology, information has become really important. They talk about millennials growing up in the information age. I mean, it's got that name.
Mhm,
So we seek knowledge for a lot of things. We can become the expert of something again from the comfort of our own couch. And
mm,
it's like anything in life, got its pros and cons. I mean, on the one hand, what a beautiful thing that we can access so much and that so many people can learn and grow and develop and work with people like you, through their computers and stuff.
mhm,
But I think you have to be very careful because it also makes people think that they really are the expert of everything. And social media kind of falls under that umbrella of technology and millennials in some ways being that first young generation of people to grow up with that connectedness just being their default. And pros and cons. It's been a beautiful way to connect with other areas of the world. I mean, I would not have met you 20 years ago probably
mhm.
doing what we're doing.
Right.
um but then we hear of things like cyberbullying and
Mm,
cyber terrorism and just, the terrible pieces that come with that. But so, just painting that picture of that technological context for this generation, it's a huge, huge piece.
mm.
And I think highly impacts like the way we've learned to be in our life and in our relationships.
Can you say a little more about that? I'm curious about because we do often hear, of course, about technology has had such a huge impact on how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we, navigate our relationships. Can you unpack that a little bit for our audience today? What are some of the really key ways? What are some of the indicators in terms of how technology has impacted millennials and their relationships? Like, what are some of the practical things that you see?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you're talking, my mind goes to this blogger, Paul Angone is his name, and he caters specifically to millennials as well. And he talks about this generation struggling with the new OCD, obsessive comparison disorder. I'm
Mm,
like, oh yes, that is so spot on. That is so spot on because
right.
when I think about the usage of social media, technology, all that stuff, um, it very much can suck you dry and pull you away from yourself.
Yes.
And for those that aren't already in a space of security in themselves or with a solid sense of who they are, they're going to go use these things and be on these platforms where now you're getting this pseudo relationship to the world that is telling you you should look this way or be this way, or the filtered life of Instagramming that looks so glamorous but is not reality. It's become a real blinder for many, many people. And I think really, really the downfall of self-esteem in a lot of ways. They've connected social media use to higher levels of depression and anxiety. I mean, I have worked deeply and individually with clients to really look at the amount of usage they put into social media and engaging in those platforms. I've had clients do social media detoxes that they
Mm,
later say was incredibly helpful for them. It did help boost their self-esteem, to pull away from just that wild world out there where you can find anything out there to make you feel worse about yourself and that you
right.
don't have enough. So
Right.
we've got to be very intentional. And that's kind of my caveat with social media and all that stuff. It's about being intentional. It's about having healthy boundaries and realizing that stuff out there, it's fine to participate in, but it's not going to fill like holes and voids and needs that you have for real relationship and becoming authentic to yourself.
And so I imagine then for you, Liz, in your practice, that these are some of the themes that you're exploring, right, with your clients in terms of, how are you engaging with this tool
Mhm.
that can certainly has a lot of positive and can really, there is an opportunity, I think, to build community through online platforms. And how are we thinking critically about how we engage on these platforms and then the impact that it has on our view of self?
Yeah, it absolutely does come up a lot, and certainly in the couple context too, there can be a lot of issues that arise. And the thing that I feel I really see is at the root of all that is that people, again, there's no regulations around all this stuff anyways. So then on an individual and relational level, people haven't outwardly defined like this is what's okay and this is what's not okay. This is what feels hurtful for me to, see you on your phone every night when we've come home from work and you can't get off of it and I want to be with you. Like we have to be incredibly intentional about how much we're going to let ourselves engage in that stuff. And I do think it's really important to point out too that just from a brain science level, right? We
Mhm.
know that the dopamine receptors, like those things are flowing when we use social media, when we see
Right.
all the little hearts fly across the screen, like we feel important. We get a little ding in our brain that's like, ooh, validating. I like that. I want to feel that again. Like we already know there's addictive components that come along with screen use, video games, it's the whole under that realm of process addiction type stuff. So this stuff can absolutely get out of hand for people. And luckily, we are also living in a world where people are coming out now and specializing in those types of things and like
Mhm.
addictive behaviors connected to social media or sometimes even harder, like affair type relationships, infidelities occurring through like sexting, texting, and just things that would not have been a thing at all for the generations before us. And so I absolutely put those things under that lens of the unique context of millennials and what we've had to figure out and put voice to and call out. And so luckily we're doing that.
I love that. And could you say, because I think it's a topic that affects so many people. And what I mean by it's a topic, the topic of how technology intersects with how we navigate our relationships, particularly as you talk about the millennial generation. But I think it actually affects many generations, right? The way
Yes.
that technology, really does impact how we navigate our relationships. Can you say a little bit more about some of those more common issues or concerns that you're seeing? And you've named a couple of them, right? Like how does technology intersect the way that we view infidelity, or how we talk about what feel boundaries, right? Even emotional boundaries in a relationship, and how comfortable how do I feel when my partner does X, Y, and Z
Mhm.
online, right? And the amount of access that's there. Can you say a little bit more about some of those key pieces, in particular, how they're affecting millennial relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say I'm glad that you brought that up because you're absolutely right. Like what is going on for millennials is also impacting many other generations, the boomers, the Gen Y, now Gen Zers after us. So we're all in this boat together. But like any other generation, there's going to be those unique things that we kind of grow up being primarily faced with or whatever. So it's kind of funny because you were asking that question. I'm like, I want to ask her, like, what does she see? What does she hear from people? Because here's the thing, it's like none of the challenges when it really boils down to it, there's nothing that's like, oh, this is the first time in the history of humanity that this has ever happened. Like infidelity has always been around.
Right.
People going outside of their relationship, not respecting boundaries, not being able to have boundaries, like these things have always kind of been there, but it's just, to me, it's kind of the compounded effects of how widespread it is now, how ingrained this all is in our culture. It's just, I guess, the pace with which it's all happening, those are the things that I feel have kind of changed. If that is that does that make sense? um
Yeah, it's like the pervasiveness, right? And
yeah.
how, right? Like it's just so it's almost becomes such a normative part of the conversation, I would imagine, when you're working with couples. You really, it's like this. I don't know if you were ever taught the skill in school. I mean, I certainly wasn't. How do you navigate social media and technology and DMs with couples? Like it's just not a skill, I don't think, that we're taught as clinicians. And yet it's a reality that we absolutely have to navigate, I think, when we're working with people.
Right, absolutely. You do, and at the same time, that stuff from a therapeutic stance can quickly just become more content. And so on the one hand, it's like, yes, we as millennials, we absolutely want to call out the fact that, hey, technology, Instagramming, social media use, like that is now just an ingrained part of our culture. How
Mhm.
does that impact you? How does that impact how you are in your relationship and how it adds to your relationship and how it takes away from your relationship? Um, but then also not getting too caught up in the like, well, so let's go define boundaries for every single thing you need to do and not do. It's kind of like teaching people to trust that intuition, to get back to themselves and to do that deeper work of like, what are the meaningful, important values that you have, the needs that you have for relationship, and are you able to stand up for yourself on those things? I think now more than ever, assertiveness and boundaries, the things that you often teach your clients about, are so incredibly important to have because things can pop up now in any area of life. And I mean, where once you might have a partner that goes on a business trip and you don't hear from them until they're back, now it's like, you didn't text me? Okay, what does that mean? I haven't heard from you? Okay, now I'm feeling insecure. Like, where are you? Okay, I'm gonna go look on the locator. Okay, now I know where you are. Okay, what are you
Right.
doing over there? Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
so much can come up for people very, very quickly. You've got to have the ability to regulate yourself, to assertively communicate your needs, to be able to respect the fact that your partner's an entire world over there too, that is just navigating all this stuff the same as you. And got to kind of slow things down.
I really like that. And I think you are so right, Liz. It's so easy. And it's one of the things that I talk with my when I'm training my clinical team for service. One of the things I talk with them often, because I think it's a trap that we can fall in when we're newer clinicians, right? When we're newer to practice, one of the traps, I remember one of my very early couples therapy supervisors telling me is don't get caught in the content, right? They're like, couples are going to give you loads and loads of content. Don't get caught in the content, come back to those core themes.
Mhm.
And I love that you've highlighted for us that millennial or not, right? Millennial relationship or not, the impact of technology is another piece of content. It's another symptom of what gets people stuck. But at the end of the day, we fall back on those core pieces, those core interventions that we know are going to be supportive,
Right.
regardless of what those details are, right? The ability to self regulate, the ability to communicate assertively, the ability to be able to set and maintain boundaries. Like those for me are like tried and true, foundational pillars that
Mhm.
we want to be teaching all of our clients, whether that's in a clinical context or a coaching context, doesn't really matter. For me, those are like life skills. And it doesn't
Right.
matter what generation you're from or whether we're talking about, an affair over over DMs or, back in the day when it was like, my partner's traveling and I haven't, spoken to him or her in however long, right? I think that it comes back to the same that the principles for healthy relationships haven't changed.
Yeah, and I think that is what's so beautiful of just sharing in this journey of humanity. Like we all just kind of share these core needs to be connected, to feel valued, to feel loved. We're never going to lose that, and we can create other means of trying to give ourselves that as much as we want, but some things are never going to change. And so that's where for me, where once it felt like, oh my gosh, I got to stay on with the trends and make sure I know every single thing millennials are doing out there. Cause now there's like these subsets of types of millennials. Like, I can't keep up with this.
Right.
No, at the end of the day, like the human in me is going to connect to the human in you, and we're going to figure this wild ride out together. And I will say, like, I think a couple of other things that are really important to note about this generation and unique characteristics around them. Well, one is us having that title of being the most anxious generation.
Mm,
Like, as a whole and as a very general statement, I do think that millennials are anxiously attached
mm,
people
right.
because things have happened over the course of our generation that have
Mm,
made it hard to trust outside of ourselves, harder to trust systems, governments, religions at large. Things happen and they're so incredibly magnified now, and information is so accessible that we know all the things that have gone wrong in all these areas of life. It was not too long ago over here in the States, we were dealing with some very polarized political
mm,
climate over here, and that has been really hard. And you just see and hear and experience the divisiveness. And I think it's very hard in some ways. It's very interesting because it is in some ways for people to trust others that don't agree with them. But like on the flip of that coin, I also feel like millennials are so progressive and we want to connect more to each other and understand differences and come together in ways that we haven't yet before. So it's just very interesting, those kind of opposing forces that are both very much in motion for our generation. But I think too, because of technology and the rise of dating apps specifically, having so many options for anything, like what school I want to go to, what movie I want to watch on Netflix or any other platform for movies, what I want to do. There's a million options out there. That choice paradox is huge for
mm.
millennials, and we can get crippled, and it can feel really hard to know what we're supposed to do next. And somewhere along the line, I think in our culture, and probably a lot due to what we see on TV and in the media and this kind of glorified perfectionism out there. We
Mm,
think there is a right choice that we're supposed to make for everything. Got to pick the right school, got to have the right clothes. I got to
mhm.
choose the right partner. That's the one that I kind of focus in on with my niche. It's
Right.
debunking this idea that there is one right person for you out there and that you're going to find them by scrolling your thumb a little
Mm,
bit. Like,
mhm.
no, a great relationship is an intentional, collaborative thing that you create with another person. And I can get down with the conversation of, so how do we make a great, healthy, lasting relationship? Like, that's a great
Mhm.
question to ask.
Mhm.
But where do I find the right person? Where's Mr. Perfect or whatever? Like, I think we need to stop asking those kinds of questions because they're just getting us stuck in this loop of believing that perfection is accessible and we just have to find it. It's really not how it goes.
And I love that distinction, right? Between, instead of asking ourselves, how do I find the right person, right? Perhaps the question and the questions that we can be asking ourselves are more along the lines of how do I actually build a relationship that lasts and that I can feel good about? And how do I show up as the best version of myself in that relationship, right? Like perhaps those are that's the conversation and maybe that we really need to be having.
Exactly. And my dream for our world is that that conversation can really start happening on a much larger scale, that not just couples, but the people and the family members surrounding that couple can help them have that
Mm,
kind of conversation rather than keeping the problems hush hush. Like every couple has problems.
yes.
So let's just speak that out and ask the couple, how can we support you? So I
Yes.
feel like we're really trying to change the system at large here. And something that I'm super passionate about in my practice here in Dallas is the premarital counseling. And it was so funny because years ago I had, I promise I'm not into ageism or anything, but it was
Mhm.
an older clinician that told me, you're going to have a really hard time building a practice based on premarital counseling. People don't have problems then. They're not going to want to come in. And
Right.
I mean, like half of what we do is premarital counseling.
Is it?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it speaks to the fact that, again, our generation is more open-minded to
Yes.
mental health, issues and wellness, and also relationally speaking, we hear a lot of couples in this generation that come in and they're kind of like it's kind of from this anxious space of, "Well, we just wanna make sure we've got what it takes," and
Mm,
um, we just want to make sure we don't have the kind of marriage that our parents had. You know, they were divorced four
right.
times or they were
Right.
miserable and married
Right.
for years and years. Great. There's like a lawnmower outside of my window right now. I hope it doesn't mess up the mic, but you can cut me out. Cut this out.
Yeah, I'm not hearing anything right now. There was something a
Okay.
moment ago, but yeah, my editor will edit out
Okay.
what needs to be edited. Yeah,
Forgot
I
to.
really like that. I like that idea that we're just, like that being intentional, that really focusing on kind of the ways in which we can show up differently. I'd love to look at, if we could, commitment, right? Let's talk for a moment about commitment and what are some of the challenges that millennials might face when it comes to commitment and modern day relationships?
Yes. Well, I do think a piece of that commitment issue does generally fall in that category of choice paradox, analysis paralysis, like people truly latching to this idea that you can find somebody that's pretty perfectly fit for you based on these criteria in these apps. And that narrative does pull people in. And it's like, I should be able to find somebody that is going to agree with me on these issues and treat me this kind of way and stuff like that. So kind of idealizing the whole um, finding the right partner thing, that's still very much there. But I also think it ties in with my general statement that millennials can be kind of anxious too. We maybe didn't have a total healthy model for what like a strong committed relationship looks like, and family of origin is incredibly important. Like I am a family therapist. I think very systemically it's pretty rare that I work with a client and don't ask a little bit about like, what was life like growing up?
Mhm.
What did
Yep.
you learn about relationship in your unique family? What did your culture teach you about that? Like, who did you have to be to survive relationally speaking? Um, yeah, I'm really getting into relational life therapy too, which is created by Terry Real, and I feel is a very relevant method for couples therapy because it definitely touches on family of origin and the inner child stuff, but not just inner child, but like the way that you learn to adapt in relationship and what all that meant and who that helped you become. So I will go there with clients. I think it's incredibly important. We got to be willing to go in ourselves to figure out the template,
Mm,
the blueprint for how we
mm,
do relationship. And there's so many factors that tie into that. Um, I think an important thing to look at here too on this topic is how millennials were parented.
mm.
And so again, like what I talk about here, it's not that this is going to apply to every single millennial out there, but many, many, many millennials had helicopter parents. We are called the
Right.
blue ribbon generation. Like it was in our generation where it was really important that all kids were winners and
Mm,
that we all got to play on the team and that everybody mattered. Self-esteem, building up that sense of self, you're important, was big for our
mm,
generation. And I think that if you asked anybody in this generation, if this lands for them, they'd probably say yes, that we were kind of taught if you work hard and you do all the things, go, be on all the teams and try to be number one, like go to college, man, your life's going to be made for you. You'll go out there and reach for the stars and have it all. And that
mhm.
is not what happened for a lot of people. It
Right.
was like, wait a second, I came out with like 35K in debt or
Mm,
more. That's only the
mhm.
average amount of student debt for millennials. Um, it's really hard to get a job over here in the
Mhm.
States. I mean, the recession of 2008 happened. That was great.
Yeah.
Lots of things happened that again contributed to this almost like shattering of what life was supposed to be compared to what it became. And for anybody,
Mhm.
growing up with a false sense of empowerment or a false
Mhm.
sense of entitlement, like you're entitled to these things because you're important, that's not going to help anybody in the real world because that's not how life really is. So, as a generation as a whole, we've had to look at our sense of self, I think, and in some ways like bring it down a notch so that
Mhm.
we can actually relate to each other on a real level. Um but like it's like who do you blame for all this? I mean, you can't just say, "Oh, it's the boomers' fault for
Mhm.
raising us this
Mhm.
way." I mean, like their generation had their story too, as does everyone. I think that learning to have healthy self esteem has got so many benefits, but we need to
Yes.
do that in a balanced way where we also teach our kids, hey, you're going to mess up sometimes too. And maybe there's
Mm,
consequences to that. Let's talk about that. Let's explore that. Um, yeah, I feel like in so many ways we're such a woke generation, and that's very
mm.
important for millennials who are now parents too. I myself have felt like, ooh, I gotta balance this. I gotta check myself because I will quickly try and go find books and resources to tell me how to parent better. But it's like, it's okay to like mess up sometimes too. It's okay to
Right.
mess up and show that and
Right.
express that out loud. Let my little kids see me
Mhm.
be sad and upset that I'm messing up and that it's been a hard day. Like, doesn't have to be perfect. It's okay.
Yeah, and I think it's such an important distinction. Again, as I'm listening to you, Liz, I'm sort of drawing parallels between the generation that we're talking about, but also all generations, right? And how I'm seeing this as an issue that comes up again and again. Before we wrap up today, what I'd love for you to do is provide our audience with, just one or two really quick tips in terms of how millennials in particular, they might be thought of as a very individualistic generation, right? How can they actually begin to take steps to build intimacy in their relationships? Just a couple of quick tips.
Oh, a couple of quick tips. That's so tricky. I'm like, where do I even start with that? Well, I do just want to say to start on that, like it is okay that you are individual and independent and fiercely empowered. That's an amazing quality to have, and it is great for relationship too. Um, that being said, I
Mhm,
do think we have to look at whether or not we become rigid in that stance, and
mm,
if that makes it difficult to reach out, connect to another, share life with a partner, which oftentimes requires giving up or changing, being able to adapt, be flexible. When we're set in our ways and we've cultivated a life, which has happened for so many millennials, they get married later, they live together for a long time before even getting married. Some of them don't get married. Some of them, it's this generation is much more open about decisions like not having children and stuff, dual income, no kids type arrangements.
mhm,
But all that can really feed into some rigid separateness if you're not aware.
mhm,
And so gosh, tips. Okay. Well, I'm biased, but I say everybody should try couples therapy or
mhm,
work with a relationship coach, one that
mhm,
is talking on their website or blog or whatever about how they understand what modern relationships look like. I think Esther Perel is a wonderful resource
mhm,
for
agreed, yeah,
generation and for balancing commitment and having passionate, alive, fulfilling relationships with being you and bringing
mhm,
you to the table.
mhm,
I truly think that's where it's at today. We want to know that we can share in a partnership and have a really great relationship that brings us connection and joy and all those good feelings while not losing ourselves.
yeah, and I
And
think yeah, and you bring up, Esther Perel, and I think she does such a great job of teaching us that we can be individual, we can be separate, and we can be together, right? We can be that individual and really build authentic intimacy in our relationships. That the two really, not only can they, but if they do exist together, I think that's truly what does deepen intimacy in our relationships.
I completely agree. And I think we share a very similar framework there where the attachment piece is so important, but so is the differentiation.
Mhm.
So is who you are as a whole person. And it's not just a matter of like, you can have that kind of relationship. I think we must. I think that
Yes.
is where we have to go
Mhm.
and what we have to show the future generations is that
Yeah.
there can be two very strong whole people and that can look however it needs to look, but
Yeah.
that can happen while there's a shared partnership and while you are
Yes.
taking life down together. So I get hyped about all that because I think that you and I probably see that happening for so many people we get to work with. But at
Mhm.
a larger scale, I think that's still very much this uncharted space that we're trying to figure out.
I
I
agree.
really, I really love Terry Real stuff too, because he talks a lot about dismantling patriarchy,
Mm.
which is another huge one.
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that couples, whatever the orientation might be, they want to feel partnered in a team player kind of vibe. And
Mhm.
traditional themes can still exist there, but it's all about like respect, healthy self-esteem, healthy boundaries, and not having power over anybody, but having power with your partner to again tackle life and do great things and feel supported and connected.
What a beautiful note for us to wrap up on. Before we end, Liz, could you tell our audience where they can go to find you? I know we're going to have everything listed in the show notes, but really quickly, where's the best place that our audience can connect with you?
Yeah, I will just send people to my site, which is millennialrelationships.com. And from there, you can connect on social media. You can shoot me an email, anything like that. I've got some cool freebies going on there. And that will be the space where I launch my course later this year. There's my accountability
Amazing.
mark.
Mhm.
But I'm very excited to have that. And then there's also a link to the counseling practice that's here in Dallas on that site. So anybody that happens to be over here near me can check us out there.
Amazing. Liz Higgins, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.